this program, we'll introduce you to the bandsaw. We'll describe all the components and controls and how they affect what operations can be performed on the saw. We've included some helpful safety information and a few demonstrations to show how you can get accurate and consistent results from this versatile woodshop tool. The bandsaw is a motorized saw that cuts with a narrow steel band which has teeth on one edge. This continuous loop of metal wraps around wheels and passes through the middle of a table where you position the stock that's to be cut. Traditionally, bandsaws have had two wheels, but lately three-wheel designs have been introduced to increase the maximum width of stock that can be cut on the bandsaw. But the saw blades tend to wear out and break sooner from the extra handling, and this newer design requires a little more effort to align and maintain. So the two-wheel bandsaw is still the most common. Bandsaws are used primarily for cutting curves and for resawing, but the bandsaw can also be used to perform simple crosscuts, miter cuts, and for ripping when the proper fences and miter gauges are employed. The bandsaw is safe for cutting freehand in certain situations too. Because the bandsaw is so versatile, it can take some of the workload off the table saw and radial arm saw, and with no threat of crawling or kickbacks. Bandsaws have been around now for almost 200 years. Large bandsaw mills are used in lumber operations for cutting logs. Cabinet makers and furniture builders find the mid-size bandsaw indispensable. Carpenters and general woodworkers benefit from the versatility of the bandsaw, both at the construction site and in the shop. In fact, craftsmen can't seem to agree on which stationary tool should become the central workhorse of the woodshop, the table saw or the bandsaw. The bandsaw is not particularly dangerous to operate, but it can still cause serious injury when used carelessly. Sometimes the relative safety of the bandsaw lulls the operator into a reckless abandonment of safety awareness. Safety is extremely important with all woodworking machinery. We'll cover more on this later. The main components of the bandsaw are the saw blade, the wheels around which the blade rotates, a table on which the stock is positioned for cutting, and a frame or arm. Because bandsaws are top-heavy, they're usually bolted to a heavy stand or to the floor. The on-off switch is mounted in a convenient location. Blade guards cover both of the wheels and the arm so that the blade is exposed only for the small length of blade actually doing the cutting. The blade is guided at 2 points. Just below the table is the lower blade guide, which has a fixed position. Above the table is the upper blade guide that slides up and down on the guide post to accommodate stock of various thicknesses. The upper blade guide is secured in position by the guide post lock screw. A sliding blade guard moves up and down with the upper blade guide. A ball bearing support backs up the blade when it's pressed from the front by the stock that's being cut. 2 guide pins, or pads, press lightly from both sides of the blade to keep it in line. The 2 wheels on the bandsaw are the same size. For a 14-inch bandsaw, the wheels are 14 inches in diameter. This is the nominal size of the saw, but the rear blade guard reduces the actual capacity of the saw slightly. The bottom wheel has a fixed position and is usually the wheel that's connected to the motor, either directly or through belts and pulleys. The blade tracking and blade tension adjusters are connected to the upper wheel. The wheels are metal and have a rubber or plastic rim that cushions the blade as it rotates. The table has a blade slot that's cut from the outer edge to the center. The blade is threaded into position through this slot. A removable alignment pin keeps the 2 sections of the table aligned. The throat plate is made of soft metal or wood and helps to support work near the blade. They also keep debris from getting down between the lower wheel and the blade. They occasionally get damaged and have to be replaced. Tables normally pivot 45 degrees to the right and somewhat less to the left. The table clamp lever secures the table into the selected position. A rip fence or miter gauge can be used for guiding stock. Bandsaws are classified by the size of the wheel, which is related to the widest stock that can be cut. Sizes can range from 10 to 36 inches, but most bandsaws are 14 to 20 inches. Another important feature is the maximum depth of cut. This is determined by how high the upper blade guard may be set above the table. For 14-inch bandsaws, the maximum thickness is about 3 inches. The power of the saw's motor is also crucial in determining how much work the saw can do. Motors range from 1/2 to 3.5 horsepower, with 3/4 horsepower the most common. The speed of bandsaws varies quite a bit, but even small ones rotate the wheels at about 600 RPM. This means the actual speed at the cutting edge of the blade is 2,000 to 3,000 feet per minute. Some bandsaws have variable speeds, which can be matched to the material being cut. Blades come in several widths, from 1/8 inch to 3/4 inches. Narrow blades are best for cutting tight radius curves, but they break more easily. And a narrow blade will dull quickly if it's used for heavy work. Wider blades are better for cutting large radius curves, for ripping, and for doing heavy-duty cutting. Here is a chart listing the smallest radius curve you can cut with some common-sized blades. There are basically two types of bandsaw blades for cutting wood. A conventional blade has fairly large teeth with alternating set. Some newer blades have a skip-tooth design with much smaller teeth. This blade is useful for cutting all wood, plastics, and soft metals. Consult the owner's manual to select the proper blade for each operation. Bandsaw blades wear out and break for several reasons. The teeth can become dull and they can lose their set. Periodic honing and setting procedures can prolong the life of a blade. Occasionally, a blade will separate at the weld joint or simply break from stress. Inspect blades carefully before mounting them and watch closely for signs of fatigue and wear. All of the general safety rules for working in a wood shop should be observed when you're operating the bandsaw. Wear the proper clothing and protective gear. Work in a well-lit area and support the work properly. Always make sure the power is disconnected before changing blades or making adjustments to the saw. Power cords and extension cables should be carefully selected to match the amperage rating of the saw. Keep the floor around the saw swept clean and free of oil or other hazards. You'll need good traction to push the stock through the saw. Get help to handle heavy or awkward stock. Here are a few additional safety rules to keep in mind when you're using a bandsaw. Keep all guards in place. Never operate the bandsaw unless all guards are in position and secured. This includes the sliding blade guard. The guards are designed to contain the blade should it jump off the wheels or break. Use the proper blade for each job. Select the proper blade for the work to be done. Use a wide blade for straight line cutting and for general use. Use a narrow blade for tight radius curves. The blade should be sharp and clean and have proper set. Keep the upper guide 1/8 inch above the stock. Position the upper blade guide just above the top surface of the stock to be cut. In most cases, 1/8 of an inch clearance is best. Never stand to the right of the saw. Never stand at the right-hand side of the bandsaw. A serious accident might result if the saw blade breaks. You should stand facing the cutting edge of the blade and push the stock away from you into the blade. Wear the proper clothing and safety gear. Wear the proper clothing. Eye protection and hearing protection are required. Maintain a 2-inch safety margin at all times. Maintain at least a 2-inch margin of safety around the saw blade. Always keep your hands in front of the saw blade. Never reach behind to remove stock or waste. Use push sticks or backer blocks so that you cannot make contact with the blade. Make sure the blade is clear before starting the saw. Make sure the blade is clear of the stock before you start up the saw. Start the saw and let it come up to full speed before you begin to cut. Never back out of a cut while the saw is running. Backing the stock out with the machine running could result in the blade sliding off the guides and wheels. This could cause the blade to break or cause a serious accident. The power should be turned off first and the blade allowed to come to a complete stop. Use the proper miter gauge, guide, or fence. Round or cylindrical stock should be cut only when a holder is used. A miter gauge or V-block jig works best. Thin stock must not be stood on edge to be cut unless it's supported with a resaw fence. Stop immediately if the blade breaks. If the blade should break or come off the wheels, immediately turn off the power. Keep clear until the blade and the wheels come to a complete stop. Never leave the saw while it's running. Never leave the machine before the blade has come to a complete stop. Do not stop the motion of the blade with stock even after the power is turned off. In this section of the program, we'll demonstrate a few of the more common operating procedures for cutting with a bandsaw. Freehand cutting. Start by visually checking the adjustment of the top and bottom guides. Lower the top guide assembly to within 1/8 inch of the material to be cut. In most cases, this is the only adjustment you should have to make. Check to be sure you're following all safety rules, such as wearing eye protection. Stand in the proper position and remember the 2-inch safety zone. Then turn on the power and let the saw come up to full speed before beginning to cut. Feed the material slowly and gently into the blade. Keep your hands outside the line where you're planning to cut. As you cut along a curved line, turn the stock carefully so that the blade will not get twisted. For tightly radiused curves, make preliminary relief cuts to remove waste and release the blade. If the blade binds or slows down, you may have to change to a more narrow blade. Or you may have to use a blade with more set to create a wider kerf. Resaw cutting. To resaw planks into thinner boards, start by setting up a fence. The wider the resaw cut, the slower the feed rate will be. If you find you need to back out of a cut, turn off the power and wait for the blade to come to a complete stop before backing out. Cross-cutting on the bandsaw. To cut round stock like this dowel rod, use a V-block or miter gauge to guide the work. You can clamp a stop block to the table to get several pieces of the same length. For cross-cutting small stock, try backing up the stock with a piece of scrap. Just remember to maintain that 2-inch safety zone, and even cutting small pieces of stock can be safe. Advanced cutting procedures. Many advanced cutting procedures can be performed on the bandsaw. Most require a fair amount of experience and practice. Compound cuts like this cabriole leg have to be pre-planned carefully. Changing bandsaw speed. Many bandsaws have selectable speeds to match the proper speed to each material. Wood cutting normally requires higher speeds, while metal cutting usually requires slower speeds. To change the speed of the bandsaw, start by unplugging the power cord. Many bandsaws have an upper door at the rear of the machine. To select the slow speed for cutting metal, push in and rotate the shifter knob until it engages. To select the higher speed for cutting wood, pull out and rotate the shifter knob until it engages. Be sure to secure the door before proceeding. You'll have to adjust the feed rate and practice on scrap to get the feel for cutting metal. The bandsaw can cut through many metals and plastics with excellent results. Before we close this program, let's take a minute to review the basic safety rules for operating the bandsaw. Keep all guards in place. Use the proper blade for each job. Keep the upper guide 1/8 inch above the stock. Never stand to the right of the saw. Wear the proper clothing and safety gear. Maintain a 2-inch safety margin at all times. Make sure the blade is clear before starting the saw. Never back out of a cut while the saw is running. Use the proper miter gauge, guide, or fence. Stop immediately if the blade breaks. And never leave the saw while it's running. The bandsaw can become a very important tool for all your woodshop projects. Until next time, have a safe and productive woodworking session.